My dad's new stepdaughter looked me up and down with disgust, calling me a poor, pathetic wedding crasher. She had no idea I was about to become her stepsister, or that I was the maid of honor she'd been complaining about. As she picked up a pair of scissors from the makeup table and walked towards me, I made a decision. I wouldn't reveal who I was. I would let her show me, and everyone else, exactly what kind of monster she truly was. The hotel penthouse suite was a study in opulent chaos, a whirlwind of satin, tulle, and the faint, sweet scent of hairspray and impending joy. I slipped inside quietly, clutching a small, elegantly wrapped Tiffany box. It held a pair of sapphire earrings, my something blue for my soon-to-be stepmother, a woman who had, against all odds, become one of my closest confidants. Our bond was genuine, a quiet understanding that had blossomed in the 2 years since she and my dad had found each other. It was a bond so strong that she had asked me, her fiancé's daughter, to be her maid of honor, a role she chose for me over her own daughter, Rafaela. I had never actually met Rafaela. My dad's attempts to orchestrate a meeting had always been met with flimsy excuses and last-minute cancellations. All I knew of her was what I'd seen in a few filtered photos, a girl with a practiced pout and an aura of untouchable, expensive boredom. But the moment she swept into the bridal suite, flanked by two equally lacquered minions, I knew exactly who she was. The ratty, poorly blended hair extensions, the aggressively orange spray tan, the designer dress that screamed money but whispered tackiness. It was her. She, however, had no idea who I was. The last family photo my dad had proudly shown her was from over a year ago. Since then, 60 pounds had melted off my frame, and my mousy brown hair had been transformed into a cascade of bright blonde. I was, for all intents and purposes, a stranger. A stranger standing in the middle of her mother's private sanctuary. Her eyes, framed by an absurd amount of spidery false lashes, narrowed as they swept over me, a slow, deliberate appraisal that dripped with contempt. "Excuse me," she began, her voice a sharp, grating instrument. "What in the hell do you think you're doing in here?" She didn't wait for an answer. "This is a private bridal suite. For family. For invited guests. How did you even get past the security downstairs?" Before I could even form a syllable, she spun around to her friends. "Girls, we have a problem," she announced, her voice filled with a delicious, manufactured drama. "Some random woman has broken into the suite." I opened my mouth to say, "I'm Georgia," but she cut me off with a dismissive wave of her hand. And in that moment, a strange, cold curiosity took hold of me. A part of me, the part that was tired of being the peacemaker, the part that was still nursing old wounds, wanted to see this through. I wanted to know the unvarnished truth of the person who was about to be forced into my life as family. I wanted to see who Rafaela really was when she thought no one important was watching. "Oh my God, just look at your dress," she sneered, beginning to circle me like a shark sizing up its prey. "Did you find that at Goodwill? It is so profoundly pathetic when poor people try to sneak into nice events. You probably saw the wedding announcement in the paper and thought you could just waltz in here and pretend to belong." Two other women, clearly bridesmaids, drifted in, drawn by the scent of conflict. Rafaela gestured toward me with a flourish. "Look at this tragic creature, trying so desperately to blend in with that awful dress and those absolutely ghastly shoes. It's actually kind of sad, isn't it?" I finally managed to speak, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I'm here for the wedding." Rafaela let out a high, piercing laugh that was utterly devoid of humor. "No, you're not," she stated, as if it were an indisputable fact of the universe. "You are not on the guest list. I am the bride's daughter, and I know every single person who is invited. You're probably one of those psycho wedding crashers we read about, the kind who try to steal gifts or sneak plates from the buffet. What's your angle? Pretending to be someone's forgotten plus one." Her posse, like a well-trained pack, raised their phones and began to film. The little red recording lights were like malevolent eyes, capturing my humiliation for their future amusement. I realized with a sickening jolt that if I revealed my identity now, this would be the moment they would replay forever. Me, standing there, drenched in their scorn. The power dynamic would be set in stone before our family story had even begun. With a sudden, swift movement, Rafaela snatched my purse from the small table where I'd set it down. She upended it, spilling its contents across the plush cream carpet. My wallet, my keys, my lipstick, and a small, velvet pouch all tumbled out. The pouch opened, and my late mother's pearl necklace, my most treasured possession, clattered across the floor with a sound that broke my heart. "Let's see what our little thief was planning to steal," Rafaela mocked, nudging the items with the pointed toe of her ridiculously expensive heel. "Oh, look. Cheap drugstore makeup and a phone with a cracked screen. Definitely not the accessories of someone who belongs at a $100,000 wedding." Her eyes landed on the pearls. She kicked at the delicate strand, scattering them further. "Fake pearls, too," she announced to her audience. "How utterly embarrassing for you." My hands trembled with a rage, so profound it felt like a physical illness. I bent down to gather the pearls, the cool, smooth orbs of familiar comfort against my skin. As my fingers closed around the strand, her heel came down hard on my hand, pinning it to the floor. The pain was sharp, a biting insult on top of a mountain of injury. "Security is on their way," she lied, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She hadn't called anyone yet. She was enjoying this too much. "But first, why don't you tell us who you really are?" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "My new stepsister, Georgia, is supposed to be here any minute. She's the maid of honor. You're taking up valuable space meant for actually important people. Are you obsessed with the groom? Did you see my mother with her rich new fiancé and decide you were entitled to a piece of it?" She punctuated her tirade with a sharp push. I stumbled backward, crashing into a table laden with champagne flutes and iced bottles. The clatter of glass was deafening. I could have said it then. I could have screamed, "I am Georgia." But the words were lodged in my throat, choked by the sheer, venomous cruelty of her using my own name as a weapon against me. One of her friends, a brunette with slightly more humanity in her eyes, tentatively suggested, "Maybe she's just confused? Maybe she's in the wrong suite." Rafaela's head snapped toward her. "Don't you dare defend her," she spat, her anger escalating. "She's probably mentally ill. Look at her. She's not even denying anything. She's just standing there like a total creep." She turned back to me, her face just inches from mine, her breath smelling faintly of mint and malice. "Georgia is the maid of honor," she repeated, savoring my name. "And when she finally gets here, we are all going to have a huge laugh about the crazy, pathetic woman who tried to infiltrate this wedding." With that, she snatched a bottle of champagne from the ice bucket. She began to shake it vigorously, her eyes locked on mine, gleaming with a vicious delight. "You know what?" she said, her voice dangerously sweet. "I think you need to learn a lesson. A lesson about what happens to wedding crashers." The cork shot out with a deafening pop, and a torrent of cold, sticky champagne erupted from the bottle. She aimed it directly at me, drenching my dress, my hair, my face. It was a baptism of humiliation. "Oops," she said, feigning innocence. "Now you really look like trash. Just some common street trash, covered in alcohol. It's a perfect look for you." Her friends cackled, their phones once again raised to capture my degradation. I just stood there, dripping, the bubbles popping softly against my skin. My mind was a whirlwind. I thought of my dad, of how this scene would shatter his happiness on what was supposed to be the best day of his new life. My silence seemed to infuriate her more. She finally pulled out her own phone and dialed. "Yes, hotel security? We have an intruder in the penthouse bridal suite. She seems unstable, and she's refusing to leave. She might be dangerous, possibly on drugs. Please, you need to hurry." She ended the call and gave me a triumphant, predatory smile. "They're going to arrest you, you know," she purred. "Trespassing, attempted theft, this is a felony. Your sad little life is about to be completely ruined." But she wasn't done. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on the makeup artist's table. She picked up a pair of long, sharp-looking scissors. She advanced on me, the scissors held aloft like a dagger. "Actually," she said, a new, terrifying idea dawning in her eyes. "Let's make sure you can never crash another wedding again." Before I could react, she grabbed a thick handful of my blonde hair. The cold, metallic bite of the scissors was a horrifying sensation against my scalp. A long, thick chunk of my hair fell to the floor. "There," she said, admiring her handiwork. "Now you look as crazy on the outside as you are on the inside. When Georgia gets here, the real maid of honor, I'll tell her all about how I protected her wedding from a psycho stalker who was probably going to hurt someone." The shock was so profound, so complete, that I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the scissors in her hand and the piece of me lying on the floor. And that's when the door to the adjoining suite opened. My stepmother, radiant even in her silk robe, her hair and makeup already flawless, stepped into the room. Her face was wreathed in a happy, expectant smile. "Georgia, there you are," she exclaimed, her eyes scanning the room for me. "I was just wondering when my maid of honor would arrive." Her gaze found me, and her smile faltered. She took in my drenched dress, my shocked expression. And then she saw my hair. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice suddenly tight with confusion. "What happened to your hair?" Rafaela froze. The scissors were still in her hand. My severed hair was still tangled in her fingers. Her perfectly made-up face drained of all color, leaving behind a pasty, terrified mask as the horrifying truth finally dawned on her. She had just assaulted her new stepsister. My stepmother's eyes, wide with a dawning horror, darted from the scissors in Rafaela's trembling hand, to the chunk of my blonde hair lying like a dead thing on the carpet, and finally to the butchered, jagged mess on my head. Her entire body went rigid, as if she'd been turned to stone. Then, with a choked cry, she rushed across the room. She cupped my face in her hands, her touch surprisingly gentle, turning my head this way and that, her manicured fingers probing my scalp for cuts. Rafaela remained a statue of guilt, my hair still clutched in her fist. The champagne dripped from the hem of my dress, creating a dark, spreading stain on the pristine white carpet. My stepmother's hands shook uncontrollably as she traced the jagged lines where Rafaela had hacked away at my hair. She whispered something, a single, broken word I couldn't quite hear. Then she said it again, her voice louder, cracking with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "What did you do to Georgia?" Rafaela's mouth worked, opening and closing like a fish, but no sound emerged. The scissors began to clatter against each other as her hand shook violently. Her two friends, Sharon and Kiera, took a synchronized step back towards the door, their phones finally lowering, the glee on their faces replaced with a dawning panic. Just then, my dad appeared in the doorway, a vision of pre-wedding happiness in his tuxedo, his bow tie still endearingly undone. The broad, joyful smile on his face vanished as if it had been wiped clean, replaced by a mask of utter confusion and alarm. His gaze swept the scene, me, soaked and disheveled, with chunks of my hair missing, Rafaela, holding the scissors like a murder weapon, his beautiful bride, with tears beginning to stream down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Georgia? Sweetheart, are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern as he started towards me. But my stepmother, in a sudden movement, spun to face her daughter. The warmth was gone from her voice, replaced by a chilling, unfamiliar hardness. "Explain yourself," she commanded, her voice low and dangerous. "Right now." Rafaela finally found her voice, a torrent of panicked, overlapping excuses. She hadn't known it was me. She thought I was an intruder. I looked different. I wouldn't say who I was. It was all a terrible mistake. As she babbled, I saw my stepmother subtly slip her phone from her purse, her thumb already moving across the screen. At that moment, Blake, the wedding planner, bustled into the room, his face a mask of professional cheerfulness. The smile froze, then melted away as he took in the tableau of domestic carnage. Without a word, he pulled out his own phone and began tapping out a frantic text. "We need to push the ceremony back," he said, his voice a strained whisper. My stepmother calmly walked over to Rafaela, plucked the scissors from her limp fingers, and placed them on the makeup table. "Blake," she said, her voice now eerily calm. "Call hotel security. Now." She guided me to a plush velvet couch and sat me down, her fingers returning to my savaged hair, assessing the damage. With every gentle touch, her hands trembled more fiercely. Rafaela, meanwhile, had launched into a new defense, pacing the room as she insisted this was all a huge misunderstanding. It was my fault, she claimed, for not identifying myself. I had acted weird. Anyone would have done the same thing. My dad's face grew darker with every word she uttered. He moved to stand between us, a silent, protective wall. The arrival of Julius, the head of hotel security, shifted the atmosphere in the room from a family drama to a potential crime scene. He was a tall, imposing man whose calm, authoritative presence immediately took control. He began to separate us, gently guiding Rafaela to the far side of the room while keeping me on the couch, flanked by my dad and stepmother. When Julius asked me what had happened, I found my voice. "I want to file a complaint for assault," I said, the words clear and steady. Rafaela's face went white. She immediately burst into a performance of loud, theatrical sobs. "You can't do this," she wailed. "Not today. Not on my mother's wedding day." My stepmother closed her eyes, a flicker of profound pain crossing her face, torn between her maternal instinct and the undeniable truth of her daughter's actions. Julius turned to the two remaining bridesmaids and asked if they had witnessed the event. They both nodded mutely. He then asked if either of them had recorded it. I saw Kiara's hand instinctively move towards her purse, a small, guilty gesture that Julius did not miss. Blake, the planner, was now in full crisis mode, whispering to Julius about the vendors and the guests who were already beginning to gather downstairs. Julius then turned back to me and asked if I had any physical injuries. I held out my right hand, showing him the angry red welts across my knuckles where Rafaela's heel had ground into my bones. I then showed him the scratches on my mother's pearls. He took out his phone and meticulously photographed the evidence, making careful notes about property damage and assault. In the background, Blake was on the phone, telling a vendor that the ceremony would be delayed by 90 minutes due to technical difficulties. My dad leaned in close. "Are you sure you're okay? Do you need a doctor?" I shook my head, but my stepmother asked Blake to give us a moment. She led me to a quiet corner, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "What do you need from me right now, Georgia?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I need Rafaela to face real consequences," I said, my voice unwavering. "She can't get away with this just because it's your wedding day." She nodded slowly, the truth of my words a visible weight on her shoulders. Rafaela started to move towards us, a desperate plea forming on her lips, but Julius intercepted her, holding up a firm hand. "You need to maintain your distance, ma'am," he said sternly. "This is an active investigation. You cannot approach the victim." Her face flushed with rage. "This is ridiculous," she screamed. "She's ruining everything on purpose. She's trying to hurt you, Mom." It was then that Kiara, the quieter bridesmaid, made her move. She approached Julius and, in a low voice, offered him her phone. "I recorded the whole thing," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "What she did was wrong. I'll give you the video." The look of utter betrayal on Rafaela's face was a sight to behold. Blake returned, sweat beading on his forehead. "We can delay for 1 more hour, max," he announced. "After that, we lose the venue." The pressure in the room was suffocating. My stepmother had to choose between her wedding and her daughter's future. Overwhelmed, I retreated to the bathroom. The reflection in the mirror was a stranger's, a woman with haunted eyes and hair that looked like it had been attacked by a wild animal. The tears I had been holding back finally came, a torrent of shock and humiliation. A soft knock at the door startled me. It was a woman named Megan, an emergency hairstylist Blake had summoned. Her kind eyes widened in shock when she saw me, but her voice remained gentle. Her simple act of professional kindness broke me, and I sobbed harder. As she began to skillfully transform the wreckage of my hair into a chic pixie cut, I could hear my father's enraged voice through the door, telling Rafaela that her behavior was inexcusable. Julius knocked again, this time with his supervisor. They had the official forms. If I wanted to press charges, if I wanted Rafaela arrested today, I needed to sign. As I held the pen, my stepmother's voice, clear and resolute, cut through the noise. The ceremony would proceed, but it would be a small, private affair for immediate family only. The grand reception was cancelled, and Rafaela would not be a part of it. The consequences were finally, irrevocably, landing. The family attorney, patched in via speakerphone, advised me to document everything. My dad took photos of my bruised hand, my stained dress. The hotel security video, combined with Kiara's recording, painted an undeniable picture of assault with a deadly weapon, the scissors. The charge, Julius explained, could carry jail time. My dad, his voice shaking with a cold fury I had never heard before, informed me that regardless of the legal outcome, Rafaela was no longer welcome in our home. My stepmother, her face a mask of grief, did not protest. The financial fallout was catastrophic. Over $30,000 in non-refundable deposits for the cancelled reception. But my stepmother simply nodded, her expression numb. When Megan finished, she handed me a mirror. The haircut was a small miracle, a stylish reinvention born from an act of violence. I decided then. I told Julius I would file the report, but I asked for a strange kind of mercy. I didn't want Rafaela arrested and dragged from the hotel in handcuffs before the ceremony. He agreed to a compromise. She would be held in a separate room, under supervision, until after the wedding. In the 30 minutes that remained, A whirlwind of activity transformed the suite. The makeup artist repaired my tear-streaked face. My dad retrieved my backup dress. My stepmother and I, in a strange, silent truce, helped each other with the final touches. The scaled-down ceremony was a somber, surreal affair. The vast room, meant for 200 guests, felt cavernous with only 20 of us huddled in the front rows. The empty space where the bridesmaids should have been was a stark, silent accusation. When my stepmother spoke her vows, her voice cracked on the words, blending our families with love and respect. After the ceremony, Julius quietly informed us that Rafaela had been taken to the station for processing. The grand reception was replaced by a subdued dinner in the hotel restaurant. My stepmother handed me a check, enough to cover the therapy I would surely need, the ruined dress, and the repair of my mother's pearls. "It's not your fault," I told her, but we both knew that wasn't entirely true. In the weeks that followed, the story and the security footage inevitably leaked. Rafaela became a viral villain. She accepted a plea deal, probation, community service at a homeless shelter, and a 2-year restraining order that barred her from any family event I attended. She sent me a long, handwritten letter of apology. It was surprisingly self-aware, devoid of excuses. I read it, and then I put it away. My stepmother began her own journey in therapy, trying to understand her role in her daughter's cruelty. She and I began to meet for quiet lunches, slowly, cautiously, building a new, more honest relationship. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, my dad, my stepmother, and I had dinner for his birthday. It was the first time it felt like we were a real family. The family we were supposed to be was destroyed that day in the bridal suite, but in its place, we were building something else. Something smaller, quieter, and infinitely more real.